The beef between Lamar Jackson and Stephen A. Smith continues to heat up at a pretty rapid pace. We talk about what's going on. John Harbaugh announcing a DB change and so much more coming up next here on this episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here today, making Locked On Ravens both a part of your day and your first listen each and every single day, free and available for you, all podcasting platforms. That includes in video form on YouTube, where you can like and subscribe to the channel. Also in audio form, where you can follow along and subscribe as well. 5 days a week for you, plus more of daily Ravens coverage. So if you have a friend or a family member who also wants daily Ravens coverage, be sure to send them over our way. And thank you to everybody who's an everydayer, first-time listener, or somewhere in the middle for your support. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Midweek edition, the Ravens gearing up to face off against the Los Angeles Chargers. We got the Harbaugh coming up. Obviously, the most well-known Harbaugh was the one in the Super Bowl. The Ravens got the better of the 49ers in that game, but now it's Ravens-Chargers. But today, we're going to be talking about Lamar Jackson beef with Stephen A. Smith continuing to heat up, this coming at the hands of Stephen A. Smith. Then you have John Harbaugh talking about the defensive back room and announcing a change there with the secondary. And finally, we'll talk about a general Ravens confidence level. We'll get into a move the Ravens actually made yesterday and a lot more as well. So let's start off with just what's going on with this whole Lamar Jackson thing with Stephen A. Smith. And again, I don't really know where this all comes from. I don't really know kind of how we've gotten here. Stephen A. has been, a Lamar hater for a decent amount of time now, which is unfortunate. But obviously with the MVP talks, a lot of Josh Allen conversation around there. And again, with the MVP, Lamar has two of them already. Look, I think he deserves to win a third, and we'll kind of dive into that. But at the end of the day, I mean, a Super Bowl MVP is what matters at this point. That's always what has mattered. An MVP is kind of like, it's not really that big of a deal, but I do think the best player and the most valuable player does deserve to be rewarded with the award. And to me, I still think that's Lamar Jackson, but he was talking with Shannon Sharpe about the MVP conversation and kind of what their thoughts on it were. Shannon still had Lamar at the front runner, or as the front runner for the MVP, but Stephen A. was very, very adamant that Lamar was not the MVP, and he was going and giving it to Josh Allen, and provided a very, very brutal, honestly, very big Lamar Jackson erasure, where he essentially talked about how when Lamar and Josh Allen played in week 4, obviously that game Baltimore won big against Buffalo, he was talking about how, at the end of the day, when Lamar and Josh faced off against each other, their stats were pretty similar and they played pretty evenly. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, hold on a second. It's not exactly what happened. And so I obviously pulled the stats, and yardage wise, sure, Lamar had 210 total yards. Josh Allen had 201, but 3 touchdowns for Lamar, no touchdowns for Josh Allen. And Josh Allen's team got thoroughly outplayed compared to Lamar's team. And there's this conversation and discourse around Josh Allen that's just not the same for Lamar Jackson. And at the end of the day, the people who watch Lamar Jackson extensively, the people who understand Lamar Jackson, and even the people who, have been with Lamar since, he wasn't putting up all these crazy passing stats. But again, even when you go back, he was putting up crazy passing stats in his first ever season as a starter at 36 passing touchdowns, led the league to only 6 interceptions that season. I mean, that's pretty good, right? That's pretty good. So, people talk about, Lamar can't, he doesn't throw for a bunch of yards, doesn't throw for a bunch of touchdowns, this, that, and the other. Lamar is in the top 5 in almost every single passing category this season. And when talking about the two players, I pulled up, or I did the side-by-side of the two. And through 11 games, the only thing that Josh Allen has more of than Lamar Jackson is rushing touchdowns. 5 compared to 2. That's it. Passing yards, pass yards per attempt, pass yards per game, pass touchdowns, interceptions, rating, rushing attempts, rushing yards. I mean, the whole 9 yards, Lamar has it over Josh Allen. And sure, record is important. 9-2 for Josh Allen, 7-4 for Lamar Jackson. I would probably say if the Bills go on to get the 1 or 2 seed and the Ravens go on to, let's say they're the 5, they'd probably give the award to Josh Allen. And, that's an argument that we can make, especially, the Ravens had their big record last year and Buffalo wasn't as good as Baltimore. But then people were bringing up, last year for Lamar and Josh Allen, it was the inverse, right? Well, not necessarily. I mean, Lamar, yes, passing yards, Josh Allen had more, but Lamar had more pass yards per attempt. He was better in interceptions, and that's the thing, where Josh Allen had 18 interceptions last year. Lamar only had 7. So Stephen A. being so vehemently on Josh Allen's side after, obviously hating on Lamar. We talked about it last week. We've talked about it all throughout the course here. Lamar's a player that didn't have a good game against the Steelers, right? We know that his game against Pittsburgh was the worst of his season. That's a fact. But one bad game versus one big moment for Josh Allen, and I think this whole conversation is flipped on its head. Sure, Josh Allen definitely deserves to be, in my opinion, second in the race. And if Josh goes out there and has an incredible week, and then you have, or I guess, next game he plays, he has an incredible week, and then Lamar, next game he plays is kind of another stinker game. Maybe the Ravens lose. That conversation gets flipped even more on its head. But for now, I'm still putting Lamar over Josh Allen. But the other thing about the whole conversation between the two is Rex Ryan talked about the two on Monday and ended up talking about generally with Josh Allen. He's like, let me tell you about Josh Allen. Let me tell you about this runner that he is and the dual threat ability that he has and how he can win you games with his legs and this, that, and the other. And he's like praising him for all this. And I'm just like, where has this energy been with Lamar Jackson? Why are we calling Josh Allen with his running threat? He's the next greatest dual threat quarterback. And, that's such a good aspect of his game. Where for Lamar, he's been punished for that aspect of his game for years, ever since Louisville, even ever since high school. Why are we having a different conversation about Josh Allen than we are about Lamar Jackson? Where Lamar's ability as a runner has always been used to discredit him. He's just a running back. He needs to change positions. He can't throw. But when Josh Allen does it, all of a sudden it's cool. Like, why is there a flip-flop there? Why is there a double standard there? That, to me, is kind of like, I don't necessarily like that, because if we're going to keep a certain energy with Lamar, you got to keep it with Josh Allen too, right? I know people have opinions on who's a better thrower between Lamar and Josh Allen and da-da-da-da. I personally think that they're pretty on par with one another, right? I think they're pretty even, honestly, in a lot of different aspects. And this season, at least, Lamar has had a heck of a year throwing the football. And again, one bad game does not dictate, he's just been bad for the entire year. That just isn't the case. But we've been talking about Lamar in this conversation forever. And yes, Josh Allen got a big win. Josh Allen had a big moment. I'm not trying to discredit him. Josh Allen is a heck of a quarterback, right? He and Lamar, two of the best in this league. And of course, them being from the same draft class, them having decently similar success, they're going to be pitted up against one another. That is what it is. Both dual threat quarterbacks. But to me, I think that, first of all, the Stephen A. hate towards Lamar, would it hurt him to just praise him once, right? Just have a nice segment on him. On Friday, you had Cam Newton defending him, and then Stephen A. said, no. And then it was Shannon Sharp, and then Stephen A., no. Come on. We can be real here. No quarterback is perfect. But I think that Lamar has done an incredible job this season. Eye test, stats, anything you look at, I'll tell you that. But competition for the MVP. But again, the MVP at the end of the day, like, we have the conversations because, as I said to kick off the show, I do really value and hope that the best and most valuable player gets that award every single season. But for Lamar and the Ravens, an MVP, a regular season MVP, doesn't do anything, right? It's about Super Bowls, championships, and Super Bowl MVP. I know I would trade all 2 and hypothetically 3 of Lamar's MVPs for one of those. And I know Lamar certainly would as well. Coming up in the second part of the show, we will talk about what John Harbaugh had to say. John Harbaugh's had a lot to say. We'll dive into him announcing a DB change and his take on the secondary, including what's going on with Eddie Jackson. So be sure to stay tuned. A lot to get to on the show. First, the show is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to up to 100 times your cash, earn a game all season long on PrizePicks. I love going on PrizePicks, seeing everything they have to offer over there. It is a ton. You can now earn up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. PrizePicks also offers weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, PrizePicks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your lineups. PrizePicks is the best way to win real money this football season. Which players are going off, which ones aren't. Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports opinions and real money all season long on PrizePicks. So for this Ravens and Chargers game coming up, if you want more on Lamar Jackson passing yards, more on Justin Herbert passing yards, be sure to go over to PrizePicks. Download the app today. Use code LOCKEDON to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today. Use code LOCKEDON to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. And the show is brought to you by Pre-Alcohol by Zbiotics. Pre-Alcohol Probiotic Drink by Zbiotics is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make Zbiotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly and you'll feel your best tomorrow. Here's how to use it. Step 1, drink pre-alcohol. For best results, make pre-alcohol your first drink of the night. Step 2, drink responsibly. Pace yourself, hydrate, and get a good night's sleep. Step 3, enjoy tomorrow. Wake up feeling refreshed and ready to take on the day. Go to zbiotics.com/LockedOnNFL to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use LockedOnNFL at checkout. Zbiotics is backed with a 100% money back guarantee. So if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code LockedOnNFL at checkout for 15% off. We're back for our second segment, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher here with you still on this Wednesday edition of the show. Talking Ravens. Ravens hopefully bouncing back on Monday Night Football against the Los Angeles Chargers after a big Week 11 loss to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Unfortunate, I'd say, Week 11 loss to the Steelers. But we have to give credit to that defense that we saw in Pittsburgh. I thought it was a whole heck of a lot better than we've seen over the course of the season. They came to play. Multiple stats back that up, and of course the eye test in general does too. But one of the main reasons why they looked good is because they ended up making a change in that secondary, something that we had seen somewhat before, but also we hadn't necessarily seen it as complete as we had on Sunday against the Steelers, and that was Darius Washington being the guy next to Kyle Hamilton. Now, obviously, you also saw Trey White take some snaps away from Brandon Stevens on the outside, but the big one was Darius Washington. Marcus Williams played 1 snap in this game when Kyle Hamilton went down. Marcus clearly just does not seem in the plans for this team anymore, which do I necessarily blame the Ravens for making that decision? Not really. But now you have Eddie Jackson, and there's a whole different conversation we'll have with him. But John Harbaugh, during his press conference, ended up, when asked about Washington and Hamilton, said that they played well, and that'll definitely be a formula going forward. And the guys that are here with us going to still be working to do whatever they can to help us win. And said it was the plan going in to have Kyle and Darius be the duo back there at safety. And they were trying to attack some of the issues they had in the back end. And we know that those were plentiful, very much so. They had a lot of those issues, but I thought that Darius played a really solid game overall. He tackled really well. It was pretty sticky in coverage for the most part, was playing his zones very well. And I thought he played next to Kyle very nicely. And that's a pairing that I would like to see a lot more of moving forward. And I think that, look, we've been down the Marcus Williams road this season where didn't play and then he comes back and still isn't great. And then obviously they make that decision. Eddie Jackson hasn't been great all year. So, something had to change, right? You can't just keep throwing the same thing out there over and over again and expecting a different result. You had to go out there and attack that moment and get better. And I think that Baltimore did. Now, is the Steelers offense anything to write home about? No. It's not a good offense. And I know Russ has come in there and it's made that offense look better than it did, but it's not an offense I trust in the postseason personally. It didn't look good. And Baltimore's defense looked great. So I think that they made a necessary change with Ardarius Washington, who's a heck of a player, by the way. He was one of my guys coming out of the draft that year when he came out, and I thought it was going to be a third, fourth round pick. Goes undrafted mainly because of his size, but I don't necessarily dock guys for size as much as other people do. I think if you can play, you can play. Ardarius can certainly play. So I'm excited to see him get a real prolonged opportunity. And obviously, if you're reading the writing on the wall here, probably means the end of the road for Marcus Williams in a Ravens uniform, which is unfortunate for him. I mean, again, was so good when he was healthy for the Ravens over his first 2 years, but drop-off has been pretty alarming. So they have an out in his contract that they can get out of it next offseason or this upcoming offseason. So that's probably the writing on the wall for him. And then Eddie Jackson, John Harbaugh, not really specifying anything on Eddie Jackson whatsoever. Another thing that, they're going to keep in-house, it looks like. So I don't really know. There's been a lot of drama in that DB room this year. Marlon Humphrey left with about a minute left to go in the game on Sunday. So crazy stuff all the way around in that defensive back room, which has been struggling for the majority of the season. And they lost Sanusi Kane in that game. So we're going to see, not necessarily that Sanusi was playing a bunch of snaps, but is a really, really good special teams guy. And I think overall, you don't like losing depth there. I think it's really hard to come by. And that's why the Ravens made a move. They made a move on Tuesday, and that was signing Desmond King, veteran Desmond King, to their practice squad. They ended up releasing Bump Cooper, the corner, as a corresponding move to that. Feels like Desmond King's been on the Ravens' radar for a while, and Spencer Schultz, who's a friend of the show, and he said it many, many, many times when he made regular appearances on here, said that when the Ravens like a guy or they're linked to a guy, more often than not, they find their way in some way, shape, or form coming to Baltimore and being on the team. Jadeveon Clowney's a prime example of that. Baltimore's linked to him since, 2020, I feel like it was, and he obviously came over in 2023. Desmond King's been linked to Baltimore for years and years and years on and off about, could they make the move for this guy? He was an all-pro with the Chargers. He's a return specialist. He also is a slot guy. Obviously, Arthur Millette, we don't really know his status right now, so depth in that regard as well. So you don't have to necessarily move as many guys around, but Ravens are moving a bunch of guys around on Sunday, and not just safety-wise, but corner-wise. As I mentioned at the top of the segment, Trey White played really well, particularly against George Pickens, and just had a really good game in general in his Ravens debut. And I think that, to me, he's a guy that probably should be getting snaps moving forward over Brandon Stephens. Not necessarily in he's going to take Brandon Stephens' job, but probably more so in a way of this probably should be more of a split than maybe even the Ravens would like it to be. It's been a very fast fall from grace for Brandon Stephens, and has certainly lost himself a decent chunk of money this offseason compared to how he at least played last year. But contract year, maybe the Ravens can afford to bring him back. I know that some people do not want that to happen, and they would much rather have him walk and then bring somebody else in or give Nate Wiggins those snaps full time. But yes, it's been tough for Brandon Stephens this season. Obviously, he's not getting his head around for the ball the majority of the time. He's been doing it better in the past couple of weeks, but not nearly to the extent they need him to. So I would think that for the Ravens, after seeing what Trey White could do, I don't think you want to play Trey White in an every down role anyway, just because of the injuries he's sustained, and you don't want to necessarily put all that much strain on him. But maybe we could see Brandon Stephens on the inside a little bit more than anticipated. They put him in there and even in the box a little bit as well, while Trey White got some of those cornerback snaps in place of him. So if he continues playing like that, and again, George Pickens is no slouch. We know that. One of the best receivers in this league, in my opinion. Really solid showing for Trey White. And look, at this point, we're 11 weeks into the season. We're in week 12. It's got to start throwing stuff at the wall and hoping it sticks on for you. So Trey White's a guy that they acquired. I didn't necessarily have super high expectations for him, but hey, I'm more than happy to be proved wrong on this, especially if it's to the Ravens' benefit. And week 1 of Trey White in Baltimore was a resounding success. Coming up, though, in the final part of the show, we'll talk about a Ravens confidence level, kind of dive into where we are with all 3 units, including the coaching staff as a bonus 4th unit. So be sure to stay tuned. A lot to get to on Locked On Ravens. First, the show is brought to you by Hillsdale College. Time is our most precious commodity, so don't waste it scrolling through the same mind-numbing content for hours and hours. How can you spend it wisely to improve yourself? Our sponsor, Hillsdale College, is offering more than 40 free, that's right, free online courses, including Constitution 101, Introduction to Free Market Economics, and so much more. Plus, if you want a great American story course, Land of Hope, Hillsdale has that for you as well. All of Hillsdale's courses are self-paced so that you can start whenever and tune in wherever. Plus, you can go deeper with readings, quizzes, discussions, or just enjoy the lectures. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to enroll. There's no cost and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/lockedon to register. hillsdale.edu/lockedon. We are back. Our final segment, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Ostraker here with you. Still Wednesday, talking Ravens football. Unless I've been to a confidence level, kind of gauge, meter, scale, whatever you want to call it. And if you're here with us on YouTube, be sure to put your scale in the comments. If you're with us in audio form, be sure to hit me up on social media, Twitter, ChaosRecord34, Instagram, ChaosRecord34, and tell me where you are confidence-wise with this team. I'd really appreciate your responses and comments because I'm really curious to see where everybody's at right now. I'll start with the offense. So how we'll do this, a scale of 1 to 10. 1 being you're not confident whatsoever, 10 being you can't feel any more confident. You're feeling on top of the moon confident. Offensively, I feel it's 8.5. I mean, I get that it was a rough game for the Ravens on offense on Sunday, and a lot of people have a pretty sour taste in their mouth from that, myself included. But I think what we've seen from the unit this year, the pure dominance of Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, and a lot of improvement from players like Rashad Bateman, Isaiah Likely, and more, even on the offensive line. I feel really confident that this is the group that can get the job done. Now, the reason it's not a 9 or a 10 is because sometimes the execution is not there. The penalties have been really bad this season, which we'll talk more about when we get to coaching in the 4th mini segment of this actual segment. But to me, I think the other part of it is sometimes Todd Monken just gets too cute, right? I mean, we can all acknowledge that 2-point conversion against Pittsburgh last Sunday was the big storyline, but it's too many of those situations. Ravens get too cute in too many of those spots. So I think Lamar Jackson can carry this team if he needs to. We've seen it time and time again. And now that he has Derrick Henry as a sidekick, if you want to call him that, makes it a little easier, makes life a little easier for Lamar. But at the end of the day, I think that there are still some flaws to work out, but I feel a lot more confident in that group than, even maybe some people do right now because of what we saw on Sunday. Now, defensively, I'm going to go 6.5 defensively. Would have been more so like 4 or 4.5 without Sunday's game. But look, I think Baltimore might have been able to turn a corner here with this game against the Steelers. Now, they'll face better offenses than Pittsburgh's, I think, starting off with Los Angeles and Week 12 here on Monday Night Football. But I think the secondary change we talked about in the second part of the show helps. I think the pass rush finding some more juice helps. And depending on the injury to Roquan Smith, hopefully he's good. But I thought Roquan played a really good game, and he is kind of the key to all of this. If Roquan plays at an all-pro, Pro Bowl type level, I mean, there aren't a lot of other players that I would take over him at that position. So he's kind of the guy that makes this all work, but you have to have everything working for you. Pass rush, they're good in the run game. They're good. They're a great run defense. But if they can even be just a below average, not terrible, just a below average pass defense, man, I think this team has all the potential in the world. So I'm really curious to see how they respond to their game on Sunday because it was by far the best game that we've seen this defensive unit play. But now it's kind of all about, well, what comes next? Can they build on that? Or was it just kind of a fluke against the poor offense and they really can't hang? Because they're going to have to hang with good offenses in the playoffs. Now, if they play Pittsburgh, that won't be the case, but that Pittsburgh magic always comes out in some way, shape, or form. And by the way, very quick side note, the game against the Chargers, and I'll be harping on this all week, this game against the Chargers on Monday night is such a massive game. I know some people aren't really feeling it that way, just like, it's a bounce back spot. But for the Ravens, if they're going to not win the North, and who knows if that happens or not, but if they're not going to win the North and be a wild card team, you probably want to have them be the 5 seed because Houston looked good against Dallas, but we can all be honest, Dallas is just a train wreck right now. So if you want to be one of those teams in the wild card, and obviously you don't want to, but if it happens that way, I think you want to be the 5 seed so you can play Houston. Because if you're the 6 seed and you go and play Pittsburgh again, who knows how that matchup ends up going. So you want to beat the Chargers, obviously, for the conference record and for the head-to-head tiebreaker over Los Angeles, who is more than likely with the Chiefs going to be a wild card team. Now, special teams-wise, how confident am I in this group? I'm going to go 5. 5. Special teams hasn't been great this season. Obviously, that starts with Justin Tucker, and they don't really have any other options at this point. Like, they just kind of have to ride it out, see what happens. I mean, I think if there's a guy, like if there's a kicker that you would feel the most confident in getting back on track, if a guy was struggling, like you don't feel confident in Jake Elliott, Younghoe Koo, or you don't feel confident in those guys, but you feel confident in Justin Tucker, like McPherson. Tucker has the resume to back it up, right? Greatest kicker of all time. So I feel like with that resume, you got to give him the respect and say, hey, if there's a guy that would bounce back, it would be Justin Tucker. Now, does he? Well, we're 11 weeks in and we're still talking about the struggles, and they've honestly gotten worse. So who knows? But if there was a guy to believe in, it would definitely be Justin Tucker. Now, special teams, coverage-wise, kick return-wise, even punt-wise, haven't really seen a lot out of that unit. Jordan Stout's been pretty inconsistent, and their coverages have been fine, but not stellar, I would say. So, especially if they lose to Newsy Kane, who's been playing really, really well for them on that side of the ball, would be really, really tough. Coaching. Confidence level in coaching. Man, this is probably going to have all types of responses. I'm going to go 4.5. 4.5. My lowest out of all of them. 4.5. John Harbaugh is a coach that I've been very vocal about. I feel like he's a good coach, but obviously has pretty fatal flaws when it comes down to it. And to me, it's not just a Harbaugh thing. Obviously, Todd Monken has had his fair share of issues this year. Same with Zach Orr. But as John Harbaugh talked about yesterday, and we talked about that with Kadri Ismail, former Ravens receiver, so be sure to check that episode out about John Harbaugh taking accountability. The buck does stop with him. He's the head coach. He has to have his team prepared, ready to play. He's not out there dropping passes. He's not out there committing penalties, this, that, and the other, but he is going to be the guy that gets the backlash for everything because he's the guy that has to have his team prepared. And we have seen some of the baffling in-game decisions from John Harbaugh. Obviously, we talked about Todd Monken getting too cute, the inexperience of Zach Orr. If they don't have their A game, it's a really tough combination to overcome. So I'm going to go 4.5 there. Obviously, it's not like 1. I'm not completely done with this coaching staff and saying that there's no hope for them for the rest of the season. But I want to see more consistently from this coaching staff. We've seen awesome games from this coaching staff. Awesome games. We've also seen duds. And this is a 7-4 football team. We can talk about, they could be 9-2. They could be 4-7. Well, they are what the record says they are. They're 7-2 or 7-4. Excuse me. I wish 7-2. 7-4 football team. So at the end of the day, Baltimore has to get back on track against the Chargers. It is really important they do so, especially with a big matchup against the Eagles coming up the week after. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning into the show today. Again, on the way out, be sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. Follow along in audio form as well for 5 days a week of daily Ravens coverage. We'll be right back here tomorrow talking more Ravens football and previewing the Ravens and Chargers big Monday Night Football matchup. So be sure to stay tuned, and I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.